Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Let's dive into a story that anyone who's ever worked retail can relate to, where managers bend the rules to please customers, leaving employees to deal with the fallout. Retail manager never backs me up and breaks store rules for customers. It backfired. I feel like anyone who's ever worked retail can relate to this. You go in the job and they tell you all the rules and things you can and can't do until a customer gets upset and gets a manager, and then the manager comes over like, "Oh, how could you not allow this sweet lady to not do this?" and uses their manager override to allow the customer to do whatever they want, making them look like the hero and you look like the angry employee that didn't let them do what they wanted. Back when I worked retail, I had this happen countless times. This meal doesn't come with cornbread, that'll be an extra $1.50. Manager comes over and gives them cornbread. The discount you're talking about was for a sale that ended 2 days ago, sorry. They get pissed at you and the manager comes over and gives them the discount anyway. I got super fed up with this and kept track of everything a manager let happen. If a manager one time let a customer buy this for this amount of money, every single time a customer asked about it, I would call the manager over and get him to override it. I guess managers expect you to try to enforce the rule on the occasion they get pressed. They just fold and make you look like a jerk to a Karen customer. Well, I got tired of it. The moment a Karen came in and asked for something clearly against policy, I would just call that manager over and make him override and say he does this all the time to the customer. It happened too often that he had a meeting and got reprimanded by corporate. He mentioned me by name as the one who does it, and when questioned, I told them the same thing. He did it all the time before, and I just assumed that he, as the manager, was doing the right thing. He wasn't fired or anything, but stopped folding in front of customers and making me look like the jerk. I'll never understand why managers never back up their employees on store policy. It's a power trip. It usually doesn't get back above them. For some reason, your situation did, probably due to how often you had it happen, which signaled some sort of notification or was caught by accounting. And our second story. I forgot to do that. I drive for Rideshare. Pretty sure we all know which one. While in the waiting lot, there could be hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of us, and I would say maybe 3 of those are female. I'm one of those females. So the lot can get quite interesting with a bunch of sexist men who like to come over and tell us how we're supposed to be doing things. This one guy comes over, and I won't say he's a great guy, but lesser of two evils sort of deal, tolerable enough to talk to. I'm not against men in general, just the particular crowd is not the best. We talked for a bit, and he eventually asked if I wanted to get some lunch with him. Sure, why not? Especially since he insisted on paying because that's what men do, he said. He proceeds to tell me the entire time how I can't have breakfast for lunch and I shouldn't eat carbs because I'm a woman and I shouldn't drink soda because it's going to make me fatter, etc., 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 etc. I barely tolerate it because I was listening to some tips and tricks from him on how to supposedly be more efficient and make more money. Spoiler alert, he was only actively working about a third of the time he claimed to be working and put more miles on his car than he also claimed because he only did airport and will always drive back empty-handed. I saw him several days later and he literally went out and bought me an iPhone saying it was better than my Android, claimed no strings attached. I knew that was BS and refused to get rid of my Android, but I was curious what the strings were. I kind of like to see these things long enough to see what the catch is. Next day, he starts demanding how I need to turn on the tracking so that he can always see where I am. He claims it's because my safety, because as a woman I could get killed doing rideshare, and therefore he wants to know where I am all the time. Obviously, I refused this. Fast forward, and I keep missing him at the waiting lot because I was going to give him back the phone, but he's constantly texting me, giving me these tips and tricks, and telling me what days of surge, but he's also berating me if I'm not working 24 hours a day, and berating me for not being up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and berating me for taking off one day of the week, etc. I only didn't block him because I felt obligated to return the phone. One morning he texted me about a buddy of his who took a lot of rides down to the airport for all this businessy stuff and how he would pay $100 for the same type of trip that the rideshare would only give me about $35 for, and that he always tipped well and blah, blah, blah. I figured, hey, sure, why not? He said that he couldn't do it because he was taking another buddy to the airport at the same time, so we'll be at the airport lot at the same time, which means I could finally give him back the phone and then block him. Over the next 2 days before the trip, he spammed the crap out of me, suddenly changing his mind about things. Oh, now his buddy needed me to be there an hour earlier. Now his buddy wanted me to have his car as a certain temperature. Now his buddy demanded that I have the car cleaned into your exterior right before picking him up. Now his buddy says that I have to buy fresh water bottles of Smart Water for him. Good. Now his buddy says I have to go buy official receipt papers in order to write out the receipt so he can submit it to his business to get the money back from the rideshare. And every single time he sends these warnings about how I better not F it up because he would be the one blamed. Knowing that his buddy always left for the airport about 2 hours prior to when he needed to be, I kept acting like I was seriously going to pick his buddy up. I didn't. Didn't even read all the messages asking if I was on my way and why it was late and that I hadn't shown up, etc., etc. While I knew his buddy probably didn't deserve that, I knew that this a-hole would get blamed because he was the one responsible for the ride. I also knew his buddy had plenty of time to call for another ride and still make his plane, so a minor inconvenience at most. I left the original a-hole unblocked just because I was dying of laughter of all the panic he was going through. It was like the stages of grief, from depression to anger, and it was bargaining in there and pleading and disbelief, thinking I was just joking and I was actually there and all this stuff. Did you forget I still had his super expensive iPhone? Here's the even better part. I don't know why, but for some reason his iPhone account was under his mother's name, so while he apparently could buy new phones, he couldn't exchange or change anything on the account. I knew this because he had lost his old iPhone and he wasn't able to redeem the warranty or whatever it was. His mother, by the way, was not quite all there in the head and was unable to leave the house and go with him. I don't know all the details of how the whole iPhone thing account works, but I know that it was under his mother's name. So I went to an Apple store a couple towns away when I was over there, and I claimed that I had found the lost iPhone. I told them I didn't know who it belonged to. They said no problem, they would contact the owner. Except, here's just the cherry on top of the icing. The only phone number registered for the lost or whatever was the one on the phone that the guy had previously lost. He never added the new phone numbers, even though you think Apple would have automatically done so, because he wasn't allowed to without his mother being there. This is why he had to create a whole new Apple ID, because he couldn't get his back because Apple could only verify the account information from the original phone number from the phone he didn't have in the first place. I even asked the person at the Apple store what would happen if the only phone number on the account for contact wasn't usable or accessible. He assured me that as long as the account owner came in, then they could look up the account and find the phone for them. Just to double make sure, I asked what if the account holder's relative or husband or wife came in. They said only if they were on the account. He wasn't. This was about 2 years ago, and I bet he still never got his phone back. Claims men should own all, but uses his mother's name on an iPhone account? What a winner that dude is. And our next story. New neighbors keep trespassing. Me and my neighbors have recently been having an issue with people parking in our designated parking spaces. My two neighbors and I do not have driveways in front of our houses. We have a designated parking area behind our 3 houses instead. The parking area isn't public land and is actually joint owned and maintained by our 3 houses. We all have a specific extra parking space in addition to one in front of our respective garages. These are included as land that we own and are in the deeds to our houses. A house nearby was bought last year, and since then, the same 2 or 3 cars from the same house keep parking there, including a Royal Mail work van. I've left numerous notes on the windscreens, but it just stops for a few days and then continues again. I was getting something out of my car, and the owner of one of the cars was actually there talking to a relative that was currently parked in one of the neighbor's spaces. I reiterated what I'd said in the notes, that this wasn't a public area, and these extra spaces in the parking area were actually land officially owned by the 3 respective houses, and in the deeds to our houses, and that they shouldn't be parking there. She said that her dad was the policeman that lives in the corner, and I said that the house wasn't one of the houses that owns this area, so unfortunately it didn't permit her to park in this area. She then told me, well, no one's died, it's just a parking space. but she's essentially parking on the equivalent of our driveways. She did finish by saying that she'd move the cars as soon as possible, though. Hopefully her dad will tell her to stop if she tells him the whole story. But I do worry that perhaps she's been reassured that it's fine to park there, though. If she hasn't passed on that, the land is legally owned by my neighbors and I. I just want them to stop so I can park in the space I legally own. I bought it. It's in the deeds. I've told them at least 10 times. It's stressing me out. Update. I stopped being a doormat, bought a sign of the correct size and shape for the parking area, painted numbers on our parking spots, and after talking to her dad, had to call a tow truck because they wouldn't listen. And our last story. We are so poor. Sell your grandpa's house. I need the money. My grandfather was a kind and loving man with a special place in his heart for his family. He had a platinum signet ring that he treasured, a gift from his late wife, which he wore every day as a reminder of their love. My aunt's family, on the other hand, had a different approach to life. They preferred to rely on rude and deceit rather than work, and often bragged about their shenanigans to get more money. They rarely visited my grandfather and never showed much interest in his life or his well-being. One day, my grandfather suffered a heart attack and was rushed to the hospital. My mother, sister, and I went to care for him, and after a few days, my aunt and her family showed up as well. Although they'd not been close with my grandfather, they expressed their concern and wanted to spend time with him. Sadly, my grandfather passed away a day later, leaving us all heartbroken. We made arrangements for his funeral and decided to bury him next to my grandmother. My aunt's family declined to attend and refused to contribute to the cost of the funeral. However, we respected their decision and did not hold it against them. After the funeral, we returned to my grandfather's house only to find that some of his valuable possessions were missing. It was a shock to all of us, and we suspected that someone had stolen them. Everything of value was gone, and the only thing left was some pillows from my grandmother. We were furious. We went to Karen, and she denied everything. We had nothing on her at the time, so we decided to file a police report and left it at that. Until a month later, when we went to visit and see if everyone was coping. The first thing Karen said to my mother, "What about the inheritance? I want to sell the old man's house and divide the money." Not a great greeting, but it got worse. My mom noticed some expensive new things Karen had, a new Gucci bag and a car, and she started to suspect something, until I saw my grandfather's G signet ring on her desk. I asked her where she got it, and she told me she bought it with the money Karen found on the road recently. Sounds convincing. We went to the car, and on the way, Karen yelled, "What about the inheritance? You don't need the house and the land. We're poor. Give it to us." We get in the car, and we're all furious. It's a good thing I had a picture of my grandfather where you could see this signet ring on his hand. I called the number the officers left me. Soon, Karen will get what she deserves. When the trial's over, I'll let you know the details if you're interested. Update. The aunt has been charged with theft, fraud, and also filed a civil suit for damages. She also accidentally confessed that she was preparing documents to sell her house. She said so because she didn't have money for a lawyer. The aunt could get up to 10 years in prison for theft and fraud with large property, and I'll be perfectly happy with that decision. Somebody can be just a good relative and live happily all his life, and somebody, for his wild greed, will lose absolutely all his family and even his freedom. Auntie is such a person, apparently. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.